think about getting older as kind of like inevitable, right? Like something we can't really do much about. But what if, and this is a big what if, some new research suggested that we might actually, have some control over it, maybe even reverse some aspects of aging?
That's the really exciting frontier we're going to be exploring today, and it ties in perfectly with the research you sent over for this deep dive.
Totally. Yeah, the study that really caught my eye, the article called Umbilical Cord Plasma Concentrate Has Beneficial Effects on DNA Methylation Grimmage and Human Clinical Biomarkers. It was published in Aging Cell back in 2022. So basically, for you, we're going to do a really in-depth analysis of what the study found when they gave this umbilical cord plasma concentrate to older adults. What happened? What could it mean for how we think about and maybe even actually influence aging?
Yeah, the goal here is to break down the key findings of this study, which, the researchers themselves called a safety study. We want to figure out what changes we're seeing in these folks and what those changes might tell us about this crazy, complicated process of aging.
Okay, so let's jump right in. First off, who were these people in this study? It wasn't a massive group, was it?
Right, you're right, it's a relatively small group, 18 people total, 10 women and 8 men. And their ages varied quite a bit, actually, from 60 all the way up to 95 years old, with an average age of 74. It's important to note that these were all generally healthy for their age, though some did have common conditions like, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol. But those are, pretty standard for this age group.
And how long did this study last? What were the participants actually getting?
It went on for 10 weeks. And during that time, each person got an injection, like right into a muscle, a shot, basically every week. And it was only 1 milliliter of this plasma concentrate. But here's the really interesting part. This 1 milliliter shot was made from 100 milliliters of umbilical cord plasma. So over those 10 weeks, they were essentially getting the concentrated essence of a whole liter of this plasma.
Okay, so a small but potent dose every week for a couple of months. So the big question, obviously, is safety, right? Injecting something like this into, older adults, were there any red flags?
That's a huge question, and it's really encouraging that, the main finding of the study was that the treatment was safe and well tolerated. They were specifically looking for any signs of an immune response, because that's always a concern when you're, introducing these biological substances into the body.
And what did they find out about the immune system stuff?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. So instead of seeing an increase in immunoglobulins, which are kind of like the body's defense antibodies, would show the immune system was reacting, they actually saw a significant decrease in immunoglobulin A, G, and M. Immunoglobulin E stayed the same. This decrease is generally considered a good sign. It means the treatment didn't trigger a big unwanted immune reaction.
Huh. That is surprising, I would have thought the body would put up some kind of fight against a foreign substance. Does that tell us anything about this plasma concentrate itself?
It's a great question. And it definitely suggests that whatever's in that umbilical cord plasma concentrate might be seen differently by the immune system than, say, a virus or bacteria. The fact that these key immunoglobulins decreased, that definitely needs more research to really get what's going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the body wasn't freaking out, which is good. But were there any other side effects or any problems that came up?
There were just a couple of, isolated things. 2 women who already had, existing autoimmune conditions. They had a little bit of redness and warmth, at the injection site after the very first shot. But it was mild and temporary. They handled it with an antihistamine. And then for the next 2 weeks, they got a dose of the antihistamine beforehand. And after that, no more issues. By week 4, they were fine getting the injections with no problems. Other than these 2 cases, there were no other major negative effects seen in any of the participants. The researchers did note some small increases in eosinophils and basophils, which are types of white blood cells, but it didn't seem to cause any real clinical problems.
Okay, so basically safe overall. A couple little hiccups, but easily dealt with. Good to know. Okay, let's get into the really cool stuff. What changes did they actually observe in these folks? They measured a whole bunch of biomarkers, right?
They did. They looked at 78 different clinical biomarkers. They measured them before the 10-week treatment and after. And the results showed significant positive changes in over 20 of them.
Wow, over 20. That's pretty amazing. Can you tell us about some of the really important ones?
Yeah, for sure. One area that was really interesting was kidney function. They found a significant decrease in creatinine levels in the blood and a big increase in estimated glomerular filtration rate, or eGFR.
Now, I'm sure a lot of us listening aren't doctors, so can you explain why those kidney markers are so important when it comes to aging?
Of course. So creatinine is something your kidneys filter out of your blood. It's a waste product. And as we get older, kidney function tends to go down, and that causes those creatinine levels in the blood to rise. eGFR, on the other hand, is a measure of how well your kidneys are filtering out waste. So a higher eGFR means your kidneys are doing a better job. So in this study, the fact that creatinine went down and eGFR went up indicates that the kidneys of these older people might have been working better, which is pretty significant because kidney problems are really common as people get older.
Yeah, that's a big deal. What else stuck out to you from those clinical markers?
They also saw some changes in red blood cell indices. Specifically, red blood cell distribution width, or RDW, decreased. Mean corpuscular hemoglobin concentration, which is MCHC, that also went down significantly. And mean corpuscular volume, or MCV, that one went up.
Okay, I think those are probably less familiar to most of us. What do those even mean?
Okay, so RDW, that basically measures how much the sizes of your red blood cells vary. Ideally, they should be all pretty much the same size. Higher RDW has been associated with various health problems, so the fact that it decreased here, that could mean their red blood cell production was getting more stable.
Yeah.
Now, MCHC, that refers to how much hemoglobin is in your red blood cells. Hemoglobin is the protein that carries oxygen, and MCV is the average size of those red blood cells. The exact implications of these MCHC and MCV changes, we don't totally understand those yet in this context. We need more research. But the fact that they changed so much, that tells us the treatment had a measurable effect on their red blood cells, and that's definitely something scientists will want to look into more.
Interesting. You said before that some immunoglobulin levels decreased. Did any other levels change?
Yep, immunoglobulins G and M went down significantly. The researchers also saw a decline in luteinizing hormone, or LH, and there was a decrease in carbon dioxide levels in the blood, and an increase in basophils, which are a type of white blood cell that's part of the immune response. Now, again, more research is needed to really understand what all these individual changes mean, but just the fact that so many biomarkers were affected points to a systemic response to the plasma concentrate.
It sounds like their bodies were responding on a lot of different levels. Okay, let's talk about something that's become a big deal in aging research. Epigenetic age. This study focused on something called grimmage, right?
Exactly. Epigenetic clocks are pretty fascinating. Think of your DNA as having all these tiny switches on it, these chemical tags that are called DNA methylation. And the pattern of these tags changes as we get older. So epigenetic clocks like grimmage, they're a way for scientists to read those patterns to figure out your biological age, which, by the way, can be different from your actual age. And grimmage specifically, that's been shown to be really good at predicting the risk of developing age-related diseases and even, mortality risk.
So it's not just about how many years you've been alive, it's about how old your body seems based on these molecules. And
Wow.
grimmage gives us a good idea of your future health.
Yeah, exactly. And the really remarkable finding here is that this treatment with umbilical cord plasma concentrate caused a significant reduction in grimmage, on average 0.82 years across all the participants.
Almost a whole year younger, biologically. That's a big deal. What does that reduction mean for the people who got the treatment?
It suggests the risk of getting age-related diseases might be lower, and the risk of dying might be lower too. This isn't just some abstract number. It's a hint that their bodies might be moving towards a healthier future, maybe delaying those age-related issues. That's the kind of insight these clocks can give us. It's like their bodies might have actually gotten a bit younger at the epigenetic level, at least according to this specific clock.
I remember reading that not all the epigenetic clocks showed this change. That seems like a really important detail.
Absolutely, it's crucial. While grimmage showed a significant reversal, other epigenetic clocks that are mainly about estimating chronological age, like DNA-M Horvath or DNA-M Hanhenam, those didn't change that much. This is important because it means the treatment's effect on aging might be specific to what grimmage measures, which, as we said, is closely linked to predicting health and lifespan, rather than just reversing all aging-related DNA methylation markers across the board.
Right, so it's not necessarily making them chronologically younger in every way, but it might be pushing their biology in a healthier direction, as measured by grimmage. Did they figure out why grimmage might have changed? Were there specific parts of it that the treatment affected?
Yeah, they did. Grimmage is actually calculated using DNA methylation-based estimates of a few proteins in the blood plasma, and it also factors in smoking history. What they found was that the treatment lowered the DNA methylation levels of two specific proteins, cystatin C and GDF15.
Cystatin C and GDF15. We talked about cystatin C earlier with the direct measurements of kidney function. Is there a connection there?
Yep, it's really interesting how it all fits together. So the direct clinical measurements of cystatin C, which is a protein involved in how your kidneys work, those levels decreased in the study. And this lines up with the better eGFR we talked about. High cystatin C levels are usually linked to worse kidney function and a greater risk of age-related diseases.
And GDF-15, what is that? I haven't heard of that one.
GDF15 stands for Growth Differentiation Factor 15. It's a protein, part of the TGF-beta superfamily. GDF15 levels generally go up as we age, and they also increase when cells are stressed or there are issues with mitochondria, those little powerhouses in our cells. What's important is that high GDF15 levels have been linked to a higher risk of heart disease and overall mortality. So a reduction in its DNA methylation estimate after the treatment, that's also seen as a good sign.
So it seems like the improvements in those two things that make up Grimmage, those mirror some of the positive changes they saw in the direct clinical measurements too. It's all connected. It's really fascinating. Beyond those markers in Grimmage, did they look at any other things like telomeres? I know those are often talked about when it comes to aging.
They did look at telomere length in leukocytes, which are a kind of white blood cell. In this study, they didn't find a significant effect on telomere length. However, they did observe what they call suggestive evidence. It didn't quite reach the level of scientific proof, but it was heading in that direction of an increase in the number of copies of mitochondrial DNA after the treatment.
Mitochondrial DNA copy number. Remind me why that matters for aging.
Mitochondria, as we mentioned earlier, are the energy producers within our cells, and they tend to decline as we age. Having more copies of mitochondrial DNA is often seen as a way for cells to compensate. It's like they're trying to make more power plants to make up for the ones that aren't working as well. So an increase in those copies could be a good sign, like a sign of better cellular health, or at least an attempt by the cells to keep energy production going.
Wow, that's like the cells trying to boost their energy reserves. What about changes at the DNA methylation level across the entire genome, not just specific areas?
They found a small but statistically significant increase in the average level of methylation across all the CpG sites they looked at. CpG sites are those spots on the DNA where methylation happens. But more interestingly, they found a significant decrease in what we call methylation entropy.
Methylation entropy. That sounds pretty technical. What does that tell us?
Okay, imagine your DNA is having a bunch of on and off switches. That's kind of like the methylation pattern. And as we age, this pattern can get messy or random, kind of like a room where everything's been thrown around. Methylation entropy is a measure of that disorder. High entropy means a more variable, less predictable methylome, which has been linked to aging. What they saw was a decrease in entropy, which could indicate that the methylation pattern is becoming more organized again, like tidying up that messy room. And that's generally seen as a good thing, a sign of a possibly more useful epigenetic state.
So, more order in this epigenetic landscape could mean a good thing when it comes to aging.
That's the general idea. They also did what's called an epigenome-wide association study, or ESS. It's like a big search across the whole genome to find specific CpG sites, those individual methylation spots, that were notably changed by the treatment. And they identified a bunch of these sites, and they found that many of them were in regions of the DNA that control how genes are expressed, and near genes that are already known to be involved in aging.
Did they find anything about the biological pathways involved in these changes?
Yes. Using something called functional enrichment analysis, they found that the genes linked to those treatment-related changes in DNA methylation were particularly involved in things like how mitochondria work, the extracellular matrix, which is the stuff around our cells, and processes involved in cell division and metabolism. This, again, points to potential effects of the plasma concentrate on really fundamental biological processes, things that we know are linked to aging.
This is all super interesting, but it's important to be realistic, right? You mentioned earlier that this was a safety study. What are the limitations we need to remember when we look at these results?
Totally agree. The biggest one is that this wasn't a placebo-controlled randomized clinical trial. That means we can't say for sure that the changes they saw were only due to the plasma concentrate. There might be other things going on. Maybe a placebo effect, where people get better just because they think they're getting a treatment. Or maybe they change their lifestyles during those 10 weeks. So based on this study alone, we can't definitely say that the plasma concentrate directly caused those effects.
Got it. No control group to compare to. Makes sense. Anything else we should be aware of?
Yeah, so even though Grimmage went down significantly, you remember those other measures of epigenetic age? They didn't. So it seems like the effect on aging might be specific or relatively small. It's not like a complete reversal of all aging markers. Yeah. And, the researchers themselves say these are preliminary findings and we need bigger placebo-controlled studies to really confirm this and figure out how effective this approach could be. They even said they're already working on those bigger follow-up studies.
That makes sense. So this study gives us some clues, but we need more rigorous research. Do the researchers have any theories about how this plasma concentrate might be causing these changes?
They did. They think umbilical cord plasma is probably full of all sorts of things that promote those youthful traits in cells and tissues. This could include molecules secreted by cells, tiny vesicles called microvesicles that carry signals, and other signaling molecules in the fluid itself, known as humoral factors. They also mentioned the possibility that the albumin, which is the most common protein in plasma and is likely young and undamaged in umbilical cord plasma, could be playing a role. There's been some recent research suggesting youthful albumin might have benefits, but they don't think it's just because the plasma concentrate is diluting the participant's existing plasma. The amount injected was pretty tiny compared to all the plasma in the body.
So they're thinking there are active things in this umbilical cord plasma that are talking to the cells and tissues of the people who received it, and those signals are promoting some rejuvenation.
That's the working theory. It could be specific growth factors, signals carried by those microvesicles, or something about the albumin itself. More research is needed to figure out exactly how it works.
This has been a really, really in-depth look at some very cutting-edge research. To sum it all up for everyone listening, what are the main things people should take away from this study?
Okay, the main takeaways are that in this small safety study with older adults, those weekly injections of the concentrated umbilical cord plasma seemed to be safe and didn't cause problems. They saw positive changes in over 20 different clinical biomarkers, especially the ones related to kidney function. And maybe the most exciting finding was that significant reduction in epigenetic age, according to the Grimmage clock, which suggests they might have a lower risk of age-related diseases and a lower risk of dying.
So if we ask, so what? What does this all mean? What could these findings mean for future research on aging and how we might intervene in the aging process?
It's super important to remember that this was a safety study and didn't have a control group, but these findings are definitely intriguing. They could be a jumping-off point for more research into interventions that could potentially influence aging and age-related conditions. Those positive changes they saw in biomarkers, and especially that reduction in grimmage, suggest that there might be stuff in umbilical cord plasma that actually has rejuvenating properties. This could lead to entirely new ways of developing treatments that improve health span and maybe even lifespan in the future.
It definitely opens up a lot of possibilities. And with that, I want to leave you with something to think about. Considering what we've learned, which parts of aging, whether it's the decline in how well kidneys work, those changes in blood cells, or those epigenetic changes measured by grimmage, which of those do you think might be easiest to change using this kind of approach? And how could future, bigger studies use these initial findings to actually make practical treatments that could really impact human health and how long we live? It's a complicated puzzle, but this study has given us some interesting new pieces to work with.